big society is a term that's been floating around now for some time with Cameron, but of course the big society is the congealing of all of this system into the one system worldwide. But Britain has always been the flagship for testing all this out on the general public. I think Sir Thomas More said that the English were the most obedient people in Europe, and that's why they could do this kind of thing with them. They would accept so much, they have a great obedience to authority. And you'll find that they've certainly tested everything on the people in Britain. They've never really had the breaks that, say, America had, Canada had, and even Australia had for the average person. They could never achieve that kind of lifestyle for the majority of the public, including their history too. Mining, all that kind of stuff, kept them mainly as a working class people, and taxation did the rest. But the big society has to do with the whole of Agenda 21 from the United Nations. Agenda 21 is also called the Programme for Sustainable Development. And sustainable development is to do with, again, the proper experts deciding if you should be born, do they need you to be born, and if you're to be born, who should they mate up with whom to have you born. They don't like this idea of just picking your own partner for having children. In fact, now, as I say, they've made it almost obsolete. Most people don't want children anymore. They want what they think is fun, perpetual teenagers for their whole lives. That's what's promoted at them through everything they watch on television and through the magazines. Elderly people now, you see, are all senile and have nothing to pass on to, no wisdom whatsoever. And that again is a fantastic trick which they've used. It's in every movie that shows you anybody who's old, they've got to be senile and doddering around on their feet. When the wisest people of all ages were looked up to by previous generations because of the wisdom that they did have, and because they knew of all the cons that had been pulled in their own lifetimes and their predecessors, they kept that knowledge and passed it to the young so that they wouldn't make the same mistakes again. But Agenda 21 will have experts deciding everything, as I say, even if you're going to be born, what you will be born for, what your task will be, and they will decide what you'll be trained at. Nothing else, just that one training. You don't have to know about geography or anything else or history, just that one kind of training. The Sovietized system, actually a perfected system, more perfected than they got in the Soviet Union. That's what they're after. And it has to do with population reduction and population management, again by the experts, on how many people should live in a certain area, to do with animal corridors for wildlife and human corridors for humans. But the humans have to be drastically brought down in size. We've had global meetings, again by the big philanthropists, because this new system has come out quite openly now saying, well, you see, we're not really democratic anymore, we're kind of post-democratic, and it's time that the big philanthropists joined in shaping the direction that we're taking in the world. You go back to Adam Weishaupt, and that's exactly what he said. He talked about building charitable foundations that would basically circumvent governments, be incredibly rich, they'd gain wealth, and they would have a say in directions of population policies and so on. So we're already at that stage. We also see more and more people being appointed to governments as experts and not elected, especially in the scientific staffs. So Agenda 21 is the agenda for the 21st century because they hope to accomplish most of this in this century. That's why it kicked off with a bang in 2001 with the 9/11 towers going down. That was to bring in the martial law across the whole world. This has never happened before, where a country has been attacked by anybody, never mind two or three buildings going down, and the whole world has to go into martial law at the same time, which meant they obviously had it all planned in advance through negotiations and treaties. And believe you me, civil servants and bureaucrats don't work that fast, so quickly. And here they are all at the same time with the exact same strategies for IDing everybody and chipping everybody and controlling everyone. Same laws. That was the kickoff for the 21st century. The rest of the happenings we've had since then have been wars again across various countries, Middle East and so on, in order to make them standardized, because the Muslim religion, again, is probably well the last one left that still has a culture attached to its religion, very intertwined. You can't separate the two. They're not into usury the same way either, and that's a no-no. You must get the central banking system, which really is there to borrow money from private lenders and get debt going in order to control a country. And that's what's happening today across the world, as the big boys who already own all of us in our countries are now after owning the other countries as well. And that's what it is. They will own them, lock, stock and barrel, under the guise of bringing them democracy, which they tell us is now obsolete for us. We're post-democratic. That's the Club of Rome that said that. And once again, they must fulfill all of the agenda this particular century. In the last century, the 21st century was to be the era of change, the century of change. That's what they called it in academia, in philosophy and sociology, because they knew what was coming. At least the high professors did. They've been working at it their whole lives, and they're funded by governments to do so, and think tanks and private foundations that run the philanthropies. Margaret Thatcher and others have called it a parallel society, or a parallel government, I should say. And that's what it is. It's a parallel government. There's hundreds of these foundations, and they employ their think tanks. They have members sitting on government scientific panels. They have members working inside government too. They have bureaucrats, a lot of bureaucrats working for them. They're placed there. And they also lobby governments. The governments know, of course, what they're expected to do. They're sitting waiting to be lobbied by these massive authorized NGOs, all under the United Nations, of course. Well, they're authorized by the United Nations. And look at the umbrella of organizations under the UN to see how many there are. And they're all for what you would think were the furthest far-left changes you can imagine. Because it's a form of socialism is to control the world on behalf of the fascists at the top. It's more efficient to have massive bureaucracies and experts running every individual on the planet. On behalf, as I say, of these incredibly wealthy fascists at the top. They like order, you understand. They've always liked order. Order really appeals to them. It's got a ring to it. And anything that's untidy is a nuisance to them, and sometimes they see it as a threat, especially free thought. That's why all your writings on the internet, everything, the conversations are monitored to make sure that you're absolutely predictable. Absolutely predictable. Nothing can go wrong. Nothing can detract or sway from this direction we're going into, we're actually into. Now, what will they do with this New World Order? Well, as I say, the countries will disappear. They may even be bought over piecemeal, pieces of them, one piece at a time, and people will grow up into an area or a region and be owned by Sony Corporation or whatever the hell it might be, who knows. But that's the way it will go. Under necessity, of course, under bankruptcy's necessity, that's how it will be done. The big society is to work parallel with it to make sure it's uniform across the whole world. And the children have to be given a special indoctrination, and so that if you mention a country or any kind of nationalistic idea at all, they'll actually think you're an enemy. They'll look upon you as being a kind of dangerous character with ideas of that silly nationalism or pride in your culture, your country, or whatever. It's all been done before on different scales in different countries and totalitarian states. It's just been done on a world scale today, and it's got better indoctrination. I don't think there's a single movie out there anywhere that you could watch today that doesn't have a whole bunch of updated, politically correct messages included within it. Sustainable development is the big stick for forcing all this through. Remember too, if you're living in an abusive system, you must really abuse those who you want to control. And you get their allegiance to the abuser by getting the abused to believe it's their fault. That's how it works. And we're being constantly bombarded with big money, big organizations, well funded through the foundations and your government, telling you there's too many people, they're just taking up the world's resources, and we can't just keep this going on for much longer at all. We had Prince Charles out, remember, a couple of years ago. Every couple of years he comes out and says the world's going to end in 6 months if we don't stop all this consumption. And it keeps rolling along, and we're still here, and it doesn't stop them, of course. They never stop, because every time they do it, there's always a certain amount of weak-minded people who believe them. So there's more and more each time they do it. But the sustainable development is to be a new peasant system, really, and the big society. The big society have categories of, again, the class system. Don't forget the class system. It's no different than Canada. Most folk in Canada now who are buying places in the country are working for government. They're bureaucrats, civil servants. They can afford it. They get the special mortgages. They get the special rights to live on the land. They're not bothered by inspectors because they're part of government. Where everyone else is being harassed all the time with higher taxes, government inspections for pollution and all these kind of things. They put lots of farmers out of business under these pretenses, and it's not going to stop. So just like the Soviet Union had their bureaucratic class who could go off to the country and their wonderful dachshunds every so often and be served hand and foot, you have a class system across the world, again starting in Britain, with the upper income brackets who work in government, who will have their better communities, their gated communities, and their rather expensive homes, but they'll get special discounts, etc., and special mortgages to buy them. It's already happening, in fact. The rest of the public have to be crammed into the already existing major cities. That's the agenda. And if you read the report, I've mentioned it's in the archives section at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, the report from the think tank for the British Department of Defense and the other one for the US Department of Defense. Both think tanks came out with the same, pretty well identical reports on projections for the next 50 years, where they talked about bringing the population down, and suddenly around 2030 to 2050 or so, there'd be a drastic decline in population. They mentioned there could be plagues. Well, a great place to get a plague is and catch it for sure is in a city situation. And if they bring in famine, which they also plan to do, by the way, food shortages. Remember, 5 agribusinesses basically own most of the world's food right now. Easy to cause a food shortage, especially when they're gambling the stuff on the big stock markets, the big casino. But they want the peasantry to be crammed into the cities, still produce as they can produce at all, as they go under and die off. And by 2050, they expect some major things to happen. And eventually they say, magically somehow, they didn't explain why, that after that period, there would be a world government, before that actually. It wouldn't last too long, and then the world would have just a few city-states, like the old ancient times, a few city-states across the world. Didn't mention where all the population went to, of course, and didn't mention people being left on the country anywhere, just these big high-tech city-states, I guess with the right breed of people living in them. The more adaptable type for the Darwinian theories, you see. As I say, those who can't adapt must die. That's their theory.